Well, welcome to the class. This is certainly the first Skype class that I've ever done, but we've all read the book, The Meeting of the Waters, and Wes and Courtney are going to tell our author, Fritz Kling, a little bit about their experience in the book. Go ahead, Wes. I think we can see you.
Yeah, real quick, Fritz, can you hear the students okay?
I can hear you, and I heard Professor Hank. Haven't heard any students yet.
Okay, we haven't had them talk yet, so. Go ahead, Wes.
Hi, Fritz. My name's Wes.
Hi. I heard you say hi.
Well, my name's Wes. Here, I'll come over here. But, this is so awkward.
You can manage it.
But
that's a lot of Wes.
My name's Wes. I'm a senior here at Sterling. I really appreciated this book as I'm kind of interested in missions and ministry in general. I think we spend a lot of time studying history. We spend a lot of time seeing where we've been, looking into the past. And as invaluable as that is and will continue to be, we don't spend much time looking into the future. And I think oftentimes that's left to students to do themselves. And I appreciated that you compiled that and used your experience and your knowledge and your foresight to look in and kind of give us that guide going forward. So that's what I really appreciated about it. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll respond to that. And that's been my experience, has been that Christians, Bible-believing Christians, are really good at looking at the past. And, whether it's through the sacred texts, the Bible, or whether it's through stories of great Christian mission leaders, Hudson Taylor, Adoniram Judson, William Carey, those people. So we're really good at lifting up those people. And I think we give a little thought to the really far off future, like apocalyptic times and eschatology. But I think it's that middle ground where we're not so great. I don't think we're so great at figuring out how do we contextualize the Bible story and God's narrative for today's culture, and maybe even more important, tomorrow's culture. That's become especially imperative as the world is changing so much. And I guess there's a Chinese problem that says you can't step in the same stream twice. And I think that's true with our world today. Just because you knew what was happening yesterday doesn't mean you know what's going to be happening tomorrow, because it's changing so fast. So what I tried with the book was to give people tools for looking at and understanding the future, not by telling them this is the way it's going to be, or this is what's going to happen, or it's going to play out this way, because I don't know that. I don't know how it's going to happen tomorrow. But for giving them to give them tools to do that on their own. And further, if I could tell you the way it was going to happen in Richmond, Virginia, where I live, that wouldn't be the way it would happen tomorrow. Would look like in Sterling, or in Jakarta, or in Yangon, et cetera, et cetera. So more than hard and fast answers or to-do lists or checklists, we need to have tools for figuring out how is everything changing, or how are we going to adapt. I think the business world does that very well. They have to, because every day they have a one-loss record, right? It's called the Dow Jones. And you can see whether companies went up or down. And the celebrity world does that well, and marketing does that well, and so many industries or fields do that well. I don't think that the Christian world makes a practice of regularly keeping up with how is society changing, how do we need to change in order to adapt to that. So that's been a kind of a passion of mine. The other one is that I think a lot of times for churchgoers, people have made maybe missions boring. They think of missions as being boring, and that's a crime. It's nothing like that. And so I think live, real-world stories of what's happening and how it's not different and this weird outpost, but actually very much vitally involved with society. I think those are good messages to send to the church at large. So that was the intention. I'm glad that that worked for you, Wes.
I'd like Courtney to come up now and give a bit of her perspective.
She can maybe talk where she is. I don't know. That might work.
I'm gonna try this and see.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. For me, I really appreciated, I got from the book that the world is in a constant state of change and that we are constantly having to adapt. And I think that's something that I got to experience firsthand. Last summer, I got to go to India for 3 months. And so some of the stories that you told and the currents that you talked about, I experienced firsthand, whether I saw them or I actually got to live them out a little bit. But I realized that I really don't know as much as I thought I did, and just saw that the world is changing and that I'm going to have to, I don't know, learn how to incorporate these currents even more. And I'm just excited to see how the church is going to continue to use these currents in the future. I also really appreciated your stories. They were fascinating to me. I don't know, they were just very, very intriguing and very personal, and they're also different, and they just opened my eyes to the extent of missions in general.
That's great. Thanks, Courtney. Yeah, one thing I'm passionate about, and I would commend to you all, is being constant question askers and being listeners. I called that the survey I did the Global Church Listening Tour, and I found that when I went around to different people in different countries and told them, just asked them to tell me about their context for an hour, they were shocked. And then maybe a little suspicious, because they just didn't know what to do with an American man with money, not my own, but nevertheless I was giving away money, who came and listened to them, because their experience was really much more often with Americans coming and telling them. And so I found that really the secret tool or weapon wherever I go around the world is asking lots of questions and then listening. And in the process, what happens is you get tutored or mentored by, the world's smartest people in their context. So I think I think that also, it signals a posture of humility and of mutuality. That's something we really need to do as Americans going to the rest of the world, because we've had so many resources at our avail for so long, and I think, have stewarded those in faithful ways. However, after, it's just like I went to Duke University. Everyone hates Duke basketball because they've been on top for so long. It's just inevitable. And I think the same thing clearly happens with the U.S. We've been a superpower for a long time. We've known it. Everybody knows it. And so I think people are tired of Americans telling them what to do. So a real, I think, marching order for us in the coming years is to look for ways to come alongside people and partner with them instead of telling them. A good way to start doing that is by asking questions, by trying to understand their context, their environment. A lot of times if you do that, you will be able to identify and kind of intuit or understand those landmines that you might otherwise step on. The sensitivities, the concerns, the resentments, the fears, the weaknesses, the things that all of us have and every culture has. It's a good idea to try to figure those out before wading in with answers or pre-programmed initiatives. And I think that probably came through in the book, just one of eagerness to hear stories and to listen and to learn. As far as the stories go, one of the things that inspired me was, I don't know if any of you have read The World is Flat or The Lexus and the Olive Tree by Thomas Friedman. But if you haven't, I really recommend those books. They were bestsellers. Friedman writes for the New York Times. And he deals with really, really complex issues and does it through stories. He's a great storyteller. And I kind of began to realize that's a great way to take on very complex concepts and deal with them. So the stuff I deal with in the book is very complex. Memory mostly has to do with post-colonialism and how countries operate after they have shed their colonial trappings. And that's a really complex topic. And there are all kinds of dissertations written on that. But in my little chapter, I was able to broach it just through a bunch of stories that I think help people to understand that. The concept of duality is very, very complex. And anthropologists have written about that, and intercultural, just sociologists and things like that. But I think these topics are so important and germane that people who care about missions, that I wanted to try to find someone to popularize them and to put the goodies on the way to low shelf so that they're accessible to lots of people. And also, I mean, quite admittedly, I'm not an expert in any of those fields, so I couldn't go but so much deeper anyway.
Hi there, Fritz. Hank here.
Hi, Hank.
I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about your life in maybe 3 or 4 minutes, just as a background. We caught the book, but hear a bit more about you.
Sure, and I'm going to close these blinds. Yeah, I've lived in Richmond, Virginia for 30 years, and I have 3 kids. 2 are out of school. They went to the College of William and Mary. 1 is at the University of Virginia, and I went to Duke University as an undergraduate. Then I graduated and taught school for a few years and coached. And then I went to law school and practiced law for a while. After that, I worked at a university, actually, in fundraising. And for the last 13 years, I've run foundations. For 8 of those years, I ran a family foundation based in Richmond. And for the last 6, I've run one based in Wichita, which is how I got to know Sterling. The foundation I run now focuses on the country of Myanmar, Burma, and so I've been there twice in the last 4 months, and I'll go back in May, and then again in September, and again in January. Myanmar is a fascinating place currently because it's opening up very dramatically. For 60 years, it had been closed and run by a junta, by the military. And the military was socialist at times. And then just recently, the Nobel Prize winner Aung San Suu Kyi was released from house arrest probably about 2 years ago and recently elected to Parliament. So now she's a member of Parliament. So the country is opening up dramatically. It's kind of changing more than any other country on the face of the earth, probably. So the De Boer Foundation is going to be starting a De Boer Fellows program there, where each year we will train, 25 or more leaders of nonprofits from around the country. A lot of them have not had access to good education. The universities have been closed from time to time, and so we're going to try to come alongside these people and train them to run their organizations and kind of backfill a lot of those skills that they might not have learned in college. So I think these people will be between 25 and 40 typically. And each year we're going to have a class of I don't know, 25, 30 DeBoer Fellows from around the country. So it's really exciting. It's a real complex undertaking, and but it's very strategic. You know, I think in 10 years there could be 300 DeBoer Fellows in that country. And we're going to train them in two things, really. One is organizational effectiveness as leaders, how to run their organizations better. And the other one is in character and values. Things like servant leadership, shared governance, transparency, things like that. So that's what I'm doing currently. And the book I wrote about 3 years ago, I guess, was based on surveys of Christian leaders around the world. And I've had the chance to meet so many amazing leaders from different countries. And at some point, I just decided I wanted to put it all together in some kind of format. So, and I wanted to capture the trends that I was observing. And that's how the Meeting of the Waters came about.
Well, excellent. I think we must try to have some students. Raise your hand if you have a question you'd like to ask. Jared, I think, if you can point it that way.
Jared, sorry.
Kick off for us.
Speak up.
Introduce yourselves as you get the opportunity.
I'm Jared Reimer. I'm a junior here at Stone College. I'm a Christian Ministries major with missions emphasis. I found your book really enlightening since planning on going into the mission field, whether it be international or national here in the States. So one thing that I connected with was the Apple guy, and I had a question here about it. So if we consider Apple Guy and all of his or her technology, I feel like when we take all this new fancy technology outside and use it in front of local and international friends who maybe don't even have enough food to eat or money to pay for schooling or education, that we're perhaps putting them in a spot where we're almost leading them into temptation or to covet those things. I mean, I think it's an issue that Apple Guy has to deal with. And so how does Apple Guy deal with this issue in a world where cultures are changing so rapidly and technology is playing such a vital role that maybe perhaps even overshadow an effective witness for Christ?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks. I have a few thoughts. One is, you said you're thinking about going to missions. You're not sure it's going to be international or domestic. One thing about the Meeting of the Waters that I've kind of become more aware of ever since I wrote it even has been that, how applicable the trends are domestically, where you live. And like in Sterling, I know Sterling isn't exactly LA, and trends don't necessarily start in Sterling, but they end up there at some point. And I think that you're going to see more and more of the trends. You probably see migration. I mean, I know in Wichita there are a lot of immigrants, and I'll bet you're seeing them around you. And so all these trends, even if they aren't the global currents, even if they're not obvious in Sterling right away or your hometown, they will be. That's because they're part of globalization, and globalization is spreading everywhere.
Hey, Fritz, we lost you for a few minutes. Could you rewind and repeat what you said the past minute or so?
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
What was I saying when I stopped?
You stopped. Something about Wichita was the last thing we heard.
Yeah. Yeah, the trends, the global currents are spreading the world, and they are being carried by globalization. Globalization isn't going to stop. I mean, one of the things I tried to say in my chapter on monoculture is that one of the things that's feeding globalization is companies and their marketing. And nothing is more predictable than global companies continue to marketing, because that's where their money comes from. So,
Hey,
all
Fritz.
of this, yep.
Okay, we lost you at monoculture that time.
Okay. Okay.
Can you hear us now?
I can hear you.
Okay, sorry. Can you start from monoculture again? Sorry about that.
Sure.
Okay.
One of the things about monoculture is that it spreads global currents around the world. Globalization is being fueled by companies and their desire to develop new markets. So if you look at a place that was formerly unreached or untouched, there are global companies that have a lot of incentive to change that. That's why global currents are going to more and more penetrate places like Sterling and the towns that you're from. So that's the first point. You asked about Apple Guy and the technology. I think that's always a challenge for Americans and people with wealth as they deal with people who don't have wealth, to try to avoid ostentation. That said, it's amazing how all around the world, when I was in Myanmar in January, more people had iPads there than ever before, and I don't have one. And so these people want to begin to acquire the trappings that come with being part of the rest of the world. It's a tough balance because, you know, a lot of times that untouched native concept we have, when they've been exposed to more and more of what we enjoy in the rest of the world, they begin to want it. So increasingly what we have to combat around the world is materialism. And that's a big problem. So at the same time, too, missionaries I've seen around, nobody uses technology more than missionaries. They're often on the road. They're often away from their family. They're often at conferences with other people. Being wired and connected is very, very important to them. So it's a good question. I think avoiding ostentation is very, very important. Personally, when I go and meet with people, a lot of times I'll just have a notebook and write in that, just because I want to avoid the barrier of bringing my Mac or something else. I also try to, for instance, when I'm in Yangon and I'm meeting with nationals, with Burmese people, I'll meet at a little tea shop across the street instead of the lobby of the hotel where I'm staying, just because I think they're more comfortable and more natural. So there are things we can do and should do to try to make it all more equitable. I do think that going around with all of the technology stuff, I think that's a problem, and we need to be aware of that. You usually can't go wrong by leaving your gadgets at home, but at the end of the day, they know that they go back to a different place than you do. I mean, I often think about that when I go to restaurants in the developing world, and the people who wait on me, they just look impeccable and they're dressed in their uniform and all that. And very often I think to myself, they go back to shanties that would make me shudder. And they spend the night there, then they clean up and come in and wait on rich people. And so that is the reality. It's a hard one. But I think sensitivity to it is a good start. And probably a lot of Americans are not sensitive to that because we're just so used to wealth. I'll tell you something interesting I saw last night. Last night I attended a banquet here in Richmond for Richmond Justice Initiative. It's like there's this thing in Wichita called ICTSOS, which is an anti-trafficking organization. And trafficking organizations are spreading up anti-trafficking all around the world. And it's part of what I call in my first chapter the mercy generation. And trafficking is a cause for your age. It's amazing how widespread, how passionate your generation is about combating trafficking. It's just really resonated with you all. And it got me to thinking about the Mercy generation and about Apple Guy. And you know, the question is Apple Guy, how committed is Apple Guy going to be? We know Mission Marm was very committed, but Mission Marm is not updating or learning enough necessarily, or nimble enough. I mean, how a 55 or 60-year-old who's been in the field for 20 years, I think there are going to be limitations to how current they can be. So, but a few years ago, I was at we had about 15 Sterling students come to Wichita, and they met with the head of the DeBoer Foundation, me, with Jack DeBoer. President Maurer was there, and somebody from World Vision. And Matt was there. And it was interesting because so many of them were thinking about going into careers in missions. So I think in a lot of ways you guys are kind of in the middle between Mission Marm and Apple Guy. You still have this idea about going into the missions field long term, and that's a really good thing. More and more when I talk to young people, they'll tell me, oh yeah, I support that group. And what they mean is they clicked on the like button on Facebook. You know, that one that has this on it? And that's their support. And some places call that slacktivism. It's really lame. And so I think there's this huge gap between those of you who view a career in missions and you're thinking about all that you can sacrifice and going there maybe for a long time. And then those other ones who will go to this anti-trafficking banquet and they'll click on like on Facebook. And I don't know where it's all heading, but I do wonder about the commitment of the Apple Guy folks and what will missions look like in the future. I don't know. I really love the passion that I see in your generation and the commitment. And I just think it's really important for someone out there, the Dr. Hanks or the other people in the world, to call you to a really high standard and to tell you slacktivism doesn't cut it. And if you go somewhere for 3 years, go all out, do your best, and learn what it's like to pitch in with something completely and not just click from one thing to another, which I think is kind of part of the challenge of your generation. I've thought about another book, and that would be on millennials, because that just interests me greatly. And I've thought about calling it optionholics, because I think your generation, my kids, I think you're optionholics. I think you have so many options, and you just want to keep them open. And that's why I like Sterling, is that I think it's encouraging you to take this idea of missions really seriously and to go deep with it, even if it's for a few years, and not to dabble in stuff, but to, you know, that God calls us to sacrifice and to seriousness and soberness. So that's what I thought of last night at that banquet. Any other questions?
Darren?
Hi, my name is Darren Casey. I'm from Colorado. I'm a junior and I'm a psychology major. And reading your book, my question is to you personally. When writing these 7 different currents, in your opinion, which one do you think is going to be the most leading and most impactful in the near future missionaries?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think if I were to do it again, you know what? I think I'd probably include something about women. I'd probably include a current about women in the future. A couple of the people I featured in there, the stories of them were women, and that was intentional. But I think I might have done some. I might add that. But the one that's most important, I think the one that's most overarching, would probably be mutuality. Monoculture is pretty obvious. Anybody who goes on a mission trip anywhere comes back and talks about monoculture. You know, I was in Guatemala and the guy was wearing a LeBron James t-shirt or whatever, and that's true. It's really a shocking thing. And that's an example of globalization. And that's one of the more obvious ones. But I think something that's not obvious at all is mutuality. And that is the need for us, wherever we go around the world as followers of Christ, to partner with other followers of Christ, again, as partners and not as leaders and followers. I think the 20th century had a lot more of that for several reasons. One was the inequity of power, the inequity of wealth. There were more unreached places that hadn't heard the name of Jesus. There were more unreached places, period, where outsiders had not been. All of that is changing. And so I think when we go somewhere, we should assume we're not the first outsiders to come with a message, and also we're not going to be the last. So that both takes pressure off us, but it also removes any messianic complex or illusions we might have. And that's a good thing. And this is true on short-term mission trips too, I think. You don't have to just go through and just serve everybody notice during your week there that Jesus is Lord and they need to learn about him and commit to him. You're probably part of a stream of people who are bearing that message. So that's one thing. Another thing is that all these countries that we used to reach out to with teaching and with resources, a lot of them are generating that internally now. They have their own scholars. They're educated. They're very learned. They're more and more able to interact with people from other countries and going to conferences and studying abroad, et cetera, et cetera. So the need for Americans to come in with all of the resources that they need in terms of their Christian future, it's not like it used to be. Now they can handle a lot of that internally. And so, I mean, I look at my mom grew up in the jungles of Brazil, and her parents started a school there. The people there hadn't learned to read, and they would not have, except for these Mennonite missionaries. And so that was in the 1940s. Now, you know, what used to take probably 3.5 days is now a 2-hour drive. And they're within probably an hour and a half of an airport, and they can fly anywhere else in the world from there. So it's so different. All that to say, we need to learn to partner with people now, with countries and with people we interact with in other countries. And that's a hard thing. When any of you go home and see your parents, do they ever treat you like you're still a little kid?
No.
Yeah. It's the same now when Americans go to other countries, and we're used to treating other countries like they're needy and like they're lesser, and like we're what's called the patron and they're the client. And that is that colonial relationship. It is very toxic. It's very toxic, and it ticks everyone off. It makes them just bitter, resentful. And so we just need to bust wide open that patron-client relationship, and we need to come in as servants and as partners. And in many cases, we need to oversell that, because they never expect us to come in as humble partners. They never expect us to come in as learners, as people who can learn from them. So when I've done my global church listening tour, one of my favorite questions was, what would you want missionaries coming into your country to know about your people? People love answering that question because it gives them a chance to be known and to declare who they are and what makes their people special. And usually their answers would be something like, we have a very rich social structure. We have very thick bonds of relationship. We are a church that perseveres really well under persecution. So a lot of times they want to enlighten outsiders to strengths that their society and culture have that might not be apparent. Another question I ask a lot of times is, if you could tell an American anything, what would it be? And a lot of times they'll kind of snicker at that one and look up at you like, are you serious? Do you really want me to tell you? And I say, yeah, I want to hear. At that point, it's like, I'm so glad you asked. You better sit down. And, you know, like 20 minutes later, they just open a whole can of whatever on me. But you know what? It's really good to air it out, because the fact is there's all that kind of junk that's bottled up. And it's been bottled up for decades as they've seen one missionary after another, and another short-term mission trip, and another hotshot young missiologically trained 22-year-old who knows the ways of the world, whatever. And they've seen an endless stream of that from everywhere. And they've bottled it up a long time for a couple reasons. One is because they know where money comes from, and they know they need money. Another is a lot of times they come from passive cultures. They're just polite people. They're very indirect. And so they bottle it up and bottle it up and bottle it up. It'll come out, though. And you see the same thing in the American South with African Americans. So like I said, the global currents, they all come home to roost domestically. Everything I've learned about mutuality, about post-colonialism, every bit of it, I need to know when I deal with African Americans in the city of Richmond, Virginia. And it's the exact same thing. I know these people carry around just bottles and bottles of stuffed up stuff. Toxic, filled with toxic stuff. And first you need to earn the trust, and you need to demonstrate to them that you really are there to learn, and you really are humble, and you really are not in a hurry. And after a while, they get to believe you. So I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, again, it goes back to the same as a parent. I have kids who are 24, 23, and 21. And I need to learn how to deal with them as adults. And as partners. And it's the same kind of thing when we go around the world now. And I think Americans are beginning to learn that. One of the questions I've asked is, in my Global Church Listening Tour, was, are missionaries changing in the way they relate to your people? And the answer was usually yes. So that's a very good thing, and that's a long answer. Your question was, what's the most important global current? I think the answer is mutuality, because that undergirds everything. Every ministry, outreach initiative, relationship you want with these folks. Mutuality is a key. One thing I've said is that, you know how with stage actors in plays, they have to do these dramatic motions, and if you ever see it up front, it looks really stupid. It doesn't look natural. But from the back of the auditorium, the reason they do that is so that it looks natural from a distance. If they just act normally, it would be really flat. So you have to overact. I think it's the same thing with Americans when we go into the field, to the mission field. I think we need to over-demonstrate our desire to learn and to partner, because they do not expect that. Their assumptions are going to be different. And so I think you can never go wrong being overt about your humility and what you don't know. And that's not to say, hi, I'm Fritz, so glad to meet you. I'm a very, very humble man. I'm not saying that. But it is to say, you know, boy, you've been ministering in this town for 20 years. I'd be so interested to hear about what that's like. What do people look to you for, and how has that changed? And there's so much I can't understand about your town as an outsider. Can you help me understand it better? those are great questions, and people almost always want to talk about themselves. So I found that to be very rich, and especially since I do like to listen and to learn.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Let's have Courtney and Michaela.
Okay, I hope this question makes sense. In class, we've had discussion about how we think mission is going to go in relation to Mission Marm and Apple Guy. We kind of decided collectively that we don't think Mission Marm will be necessary in the future, but there's going to be more presence of Apple Guys going out and equipping natives for indigenous leadership and yeah.
Right.
So I just wondering what your opinion is on that. Do you think Mission Mars will still be necessary, or do you think, kind of like us, that maybe they're going to be phased out at some point?
Yeah, that's a great question. Just this morning I was Skyping with about a 20-year missionary in Indonesia, and he works for CBN, you know, the 700 Club, and they have something called Operation Blessing. Anyway, he's been there for 20 years, and he's married to an Indonesian lady, and most of his relatives are Muslims. He's an American. I think there will always be a place for those kinds of people, and I think it's really good too, because their understandings and insights into the culture are invaluable. I have such a high regard, and let me say even a healthy fear of what I don't know and never can know about different cultures. Cultures are so opaque, and they're so entrenched, and they're often code. What I mean by that is that they're not written out, they're not spelled out, they're not explained, they're just something you need to know. It's like the saying, if you want to learn about water, don't ask a fish. And so I think the place of long-term missionaries is always going to be there. And that's a good thing, because I think God is always going to call people to that. And there's a special richness that comes with going to another country and diving deep and really getting to understand them and love them and become one of them. So I think that'll always be there. But I think you're exactly right that we would be wrong to assume that long-term missionaries will play as central a role in the future as they have in the past. There's no way. Number of long-term missionaries being sent by agencies is down. Giving to them is down. The number of short-term trips is certainly up. And even for people who go for a year or a couple years, I don't think it's with the expectation anymore necessarily that it's going to be forever or for a lifetime. So also the era when that was needed has changed a lot, because now we can get all around the world within a day or two, and we can go back and forth easier than ever before. And also those places where we used to go long term now are raising up their own indigenous leaders and have resources they didn't used to. So the whole mix is scrambled, and I do not think that Mission Marm is going to be the model of the future. So I think you're exactly right about that. Now, I mean, that means the really smart guys and ladies who run mission agencies need to figure out how we can continue to perpetuate our mission and the things we want to do for the kingdom. How do we continue to try to spread the Great Commission? How do we try to fulfill the Great Commandment with short timers? Well, that becomes kind of a logistical and strategical question for people that run agencies. And that's what I would encourage them to do constantly, is to sit down, get your smartest people in a room with a whiteboard, make sure they come from the U.S., from other countries, and get them together and figure out, okay, if we want to be around in 20 years, let's assume long-term missionaries, lifetime missionaries, are going to comprise, I don't know, X percentage of that, whereas they were 10X 20 years ago or 30 years ago. So how do we need to tweak our model in order to retain our effectiveness in a completely changed future? That begins to sound more like a business planning mission than an old missionary planning mission, doesn't it? And I like that. But I think it takes really smart people who go in with eyes wide open and aren't assuming that things are going to look in the future like they did in the past. Because that's a... And you know what? I don't find that many people are really interested in that or able to do that. I don't think it means I'm special. It just means that certain parts of puzzles interest me. And I don't think there are that many people who want to look at this big issue from 30,000 feet, have it be informed by granular on-the-ground feedback from the U.S. and abroad, and figure out what should we change so that it'll work in 2025. I don't think there are that many people that find that to be just a delicious challenge. I do, but and I guess that's part of what I was hoping to do with the book, was to help people see just how strategic and exciting missions is, to welcome the change, to identify it, and to find it really exciting to think about where this is going. But I didn't quit my day job. I'm not banking on that happening.
Thank you.
Sure, good question.
Thanks. Thanks, Fritz. These questions your responses are just very, very profound and helpful. We've got a whole class with lots of questions, so let's see how many we can cover.
Great.
Michaela's next.
We'll go to the lightning round now, and I will confine my answers to like 90 to 120 seconds. Go.
My name is Michaela. I'm a ministry major with an emphasis on missions, and my question is about the Mercy Generation. And why do you think the Mercy Generation is so fearless or risk-taking? That's described in the book, and I'm just wondering what your thoughts were on that.
I think they're actually experience-oriented, and I think they've grown up with their parents trying to give them just a wide variety of experiences, and to send them to camps, and to send them on mission trips, and to give them special classes and internships and things like that. And so I think as they go into the world, they also expect that they're going to just have lots and lots of different experiences. So they've also been exposed to the world so much more than people in the past. I mean, you know, it's ancient history, but when I was growing up, all we had was National Geographic. National Geographic came out once a month, with beautiful photos from around the world. We didn't have cable channels from all around the world. We didn't have daily news feeds or Twitter from, you know, a square in Cairo or things like that. So the accessibility and the how well we could relate to those things in our everyday life in Sterling or Wichita or Colorado was very different than it is today. So you talked about a fearlessness. I think there is a openness and an assumption that the world is mine. I can go wherever I want. I can do whatever I want, and there's nothing stopping me. And the internet fuels that also. So things that formerly seemed so exotic and distant and removed and otherworldly, nowadays, my kids just grow up assuming, yeah, I can Skype with them, no biggie. That's just, I mean, that's happened in 40 years. It's remarkable.
There we go. Okay, sorry about that.
Where'd you lose me? Right when I was talking about monoculture?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
Are you ready for a new question, Fritz?
Yeah, I took about 110 seconds on that.
Okay, perfect. This is John.
Hi, my name is John. I'm a senior studying Christian ministries with an emphasis in urban ministry. one of the things I want to do with my life is actually train church leaders, both at home and abroad. And reading your book, a concern that I had was some of the influences on the Mercy generation. I know you talked about mediation as far as needing it for a lot of splinter groups, but there's a lot of popular writing right now that borders on heretical or crosses that line. And one of my concerns is how are we going to, how do we promote orthodoxy? How do we continue to make sure that we're true to the gospel message as we go forward when a lot of the influences on our generation have strayed away from that one way or another?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Mercy generation, it's been so interesting. I've defined a trend in my mind as something that younger people don't view it as a trend because they assume it's always been that way. Older people don't view it as a trend because they assume nothing has changed. So like with the Mercy generation, old people assume everything still revolves around evangelism. Young people assume it's always been about mercy. And so they're not necessarily talking about it, but they're assuming different things. When your parents grew up and when I grew up, it was evangelism. There was this 4 spiritual laws. There was evangelism explosion. There was Josh McDowell, evidence that demands a verdict, apologetics. There was Campus Crusade. Everything was evangelism. And now, us old people look at you guys and say, gosh, it's all mercy. They're very soft on the whole salvific evangelism thing, aren't they? And some old people think, this is terrible. They're just giving away the farm. They think it's all about doing good and helping slaves and all that stuff. We need to bring people to Christ. And what I think is that your generation is deeply committed to Jesus being the only answer, but that you want to express that in different ways than your parents did. And you don't just simply want to evangelize. That's why in the book I call it, you're an evangelism 2 group of people. You want to save the slaves. You want to save the earth. You want to feed the hungry. You want to clothe the naked. And you want to do evangelism 2. It's all part of it. It's more integrated. But that concerns older people. And what I've told older people is that another good thing about your generation is you are open to cross-generational mentoring. I think that my experience has been that millennials desire relationships with older people. And so I think this is an age for discipleship, for older people to come alongside younger people and say, this is so wonderful, this mercy heart that you have beating inside of you. And we want to walk alongside you and also work with you to give voice to that through evangelism also. So I'd encourage you all to seek out older mentors. And I think you'd be surprised at how many of them would be willing to do that. But to your point about syncretism, basically, that is one of the challenges when you're a mediator, when you try to be a middle person, and how to stand for orthodoxy and for biblical principles, while at the same time reaching out to someone else. Let me give you one example, and I'm going a little long on this one, but one time I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Muslim cab driver, and we were talking about his faith. I was asking him all about it because they go and buy, I guess, a lamb and they slaughter it. And I asked him, where do you get that, and how do you do that here in Richmond and all that? And as he was dropping me off, he said, well, you know, you're a man of faith, Fritz, and we all believe the same thing anyway. And I told him, I said, Hamad, actually, we don't. I really admire you because you're a devout man and you take your faith so seriously. And in fact, I have more in common with you, Hamad, than I do with many Americans who call themselves Christians, who aren't serious about their faith. So I really admire you. I have to tell you that we believe different things because you believe that Jesus was a great prophet. I believe that he came, he was God's son, he died, and he rose. And those are the main things to me in my faith. And so that's very different than yours, but it's faith. And I put all of my chips in that square, and you put all yours in another square. And it's fun to walk alongside you as another man of devout faith. So I just wanted to be clear with him and say, here are the things I stand for, but at the same time be very respectful for another devout seeker who has reached some different conclusions. It's not my job to seal the deal. It's also not my job to chastise him for decisions he's made, but I do want to speak lovingly and clearly about what I believe. I think that's one way to avoid syncretism. And what happens is the more you put yourself in situations where you're working with people different than you, it's like a laboratory or a fitness center. You get to work out those muscles. And you learn how to be fluent in this language and stand up for what you believe while also honoring what they believe without fracturing a relationship. So I really encourage you to do that workout, that fitness laboratory stuff where you learn how to affirm and be loving to others, and but also stand your ground. And it's the same with Muslims. It's the same with postmoderns. It's the same with. It's just a kind of language. And I remember one time Tim Keller's came to Richmond, you know, the pastor of Redeemer in New York, and he spoke at the church of a friend of mine who's very liberal. And my friend said afterwards, "Gosh, I love Keller's language." And I told Keller that, and he said, "Well, thank you. I work very hard at that. I try really hard to find language that's very clear and theologically grounded without being judgmental towards others." And if you listen to Keller or read his stuff, you can see that.
Dixie?
Well, you touched quite a bit on my question just now, but my name's Dixie. I'm a freshman here, and I'm a biblical studies major. So you talk a lot about how you spend, in your chapter on mediation, you talked a lot about like your time that you spent with people of the Muslim faith and stuff, and I was wondering, do you also spend time with other people groups practicing mediation among them, and if so, just what are they and how do you do that with different groups? Because like different religious groups and other things are just so vastly, the differences are amazing. So
yeah, the answer is no, I don't. I mean, I spend it with people of different ethnicities, and I try to be around people of different ages a lot. And I think all of that helps me find language that is accessible to people who are different than me. But no, I'm around Buddhists a lot when I go to Myanmar. Yeah. But I don't know the ins and outs of all the faiths equally well. And I think that when when you go to another country or you're dealing with certain kinds of religious groups, it's important to understand their theologies. So I think I've had the most intentional dialogues in my city with Muslims. And that's been very interesting because, conservative Muslims have an awful lot in common with conservative Christians in terms of their social stances. You think about political and social stances of conservative Christians, conservative U.S. Muslims are going to line up very similarly on most of those. So when you meet with them, you have something in common. I'll give you one example. A Muslim couple friend of mine, we had them to dinner one time, and they asked Val and me for advice on how to protect their children who are in public school during Halloween season so that they don't just buy into all of that either materialistic or evil stuff with spirits. And so they asked us, for you as Christians, you tried to shelter your kids. How did you do it? Isn't that a neat discussion with a Muslim mom and dad who are raising their kids in public schools? I think that's exactly the kind of discussion Jesus would have had. I think he might have been having that discussion more than leading a Bible study. Now, he wouldn't have been thinking the things I thought the next day about one thing or another, so the similarities end pretty quickly, but...
Who's next after?
Hey Fritz, I'm sorry we lost you. Can we start with another question?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, Tanessa.
Hi.
Hey.
My name's Tanissa, and I'm a freshman here at Sterling. My major is business with an emphasis in social entrepreneurship. But I plan on going into missions. This isn't the question that I initially planned on asking, but Dixie inspired it. Have you ever had an experience where you talk to someone of a different faith and they've been upset with you, or they responded negatively instead of being like, oh, I appreciate your devout faith, and asking you for advice? Have they been like, I don't know, disgusted with you or mad at you?
You know, what's actually happened more often is that I've gotten those reactions from Christians, where I'll be talking about mediation, and someone will come up afterwards and basically say, I feel sorry for you. And I said, oh, well, what do you mean? They said, you're just so naive that you believe all that, that these people are here to be our friends. I had another person one time walk out of a talk when I began talking about social justice, because they had been led to believe by probably radio talk show hosts and others that that is code word for liberal politics. And so I think this idea about mediation, for instance, is very threatening to many. I think it's misunderstood by many, especially people my age who want to see things in black and white and who really buy into the culture wars. One thing I believe about your generation is that you all are so over the culture wars that you don't want to go around fighting and being angry. And I mean, and one thing Apple Guy has to deal with in the post-culture war era is, what do you do when you've lost issues like gay marriage? And what do you do when you aren't interested in fighting the abortion wars your parents fought? But I don't sense that same resolve in your generation to keep up those wars. And so society changes, and that's a bad thing. But when I talk about that mediation role, that's kind of more the negative feedback that I get. And I'm conservative in most ways, but not conservative enough for some people. So that's the main pushback I get. And I have to admit, I'm not one who goes out and evangelizes on the streets in India with Hindus, or who's on the street corner or evangelizing Buddhists in Tokyo. Some of these really hard places and hard things. That's not been my pattern to date. I've been more trying to help shape minds here in the U.S. and to expand minds, and it gets pushed back sometimes.
Thank you.
Well, I think we're running out of time, Fritz, but let's, David, see if you and Caitlin can still get in a quick question.
My name is David. I'm a senior here. I'm a biology major. My question is, where do you see, or how do you see the church in the United States in the future in comparison to the global church for the rest of the world?
I think, first of all, I'm really bullish on the American church. I think it's played an amazing role in the past. I think the American church has been one of God's gifts to the world. Imperfect as it is, it has really run faithfully its leg during the last century and served the world generously, nobly. I think in the future we're not going to have the same leadership role. I think we need to play more of a mutual role. I still do think that Americans have kind of like natural gifts of leadership, of administration, of project management, of strategy, things like that. If it comes to evangelizing, I don't think we're going to, I mean, I'd take a Brazilian anytime. Or there are a bunch of people and nationalities that are excellent at that, and they don't need Americans to go over there and evangelize. I think our money is going to continue to be important, but I'm not sure we're going to have more than South Korea or other places. So I think mostly our leadership and our those kinds of things. I hope we'll continue to look internationally. And I don't think we're going to be able to be the front runners anymore that we've been for the long time. I think we're going to be maybe a team of equals. Yeah.
Last question, Caitlin.
My name is Caitlin. I'm a freshman, and I'm a biblical studies major with the intent of using that for a youth ministry. And my question deals with monoculture. And in that chapter, you say, "Rather, I urge fellow followers of Christ to join me in discerning how to use monoculture for God's good and our own good." And then you follow eventually by saying that a disproportionate number of youth and young adults shape monoculture. So then my question is, what would you say would be the easiest way to impact the global youth monoculture? And then also, as Christian young adults, what roles are needed most, or what roles do we need to assume?
Wow, that's a good one. Well, I mean, clearly, one of the ways to affect the global youth culture has to be through media. And, you know, currently it's through Twitter. I've predicted the downfall of Facebook for a while, ever since old people got in. I think whenever old people invade a space, the young people go create a new one. And so I think, you know, Twitter, I think, and then, you know, I think really staying on top of just what's going on in terms of technology is huge. I will never forget, you know, if you go on Twitter, older people look at that and think, oh my gosh, I don't care what someone's ordering at a drive-through at the, you know, the Burger King. And they just think it's inane. But then I tell them, you can go on and you can search hashtag my life sucks or hashtag pray for me. It blows your mind what shows up. So I know someone who works on a college campus, and it's a huge one, and he does that. Hashtag pray for me, whatever that campus is, KU, I don't know. And then he'll direct message them back and say, I'm praying for you. And so begins a dialogue. So, you know, older people are going to write stuff off, and young people figure out how to use the Roman roads that exist and to use them for God and for good. So older people can't get there from here. We barely know, I mean, y'all can follow me on Twitter, by the way, and go on to themeetingofthewaters.com. There's a bunch of good postings there. I like Twitter a lot, and but older people can't figure out how to use it creatively. That's up to you guys. That's one thing. The other one is keep up with music, keep up with celebrities. Those are like the lingua franca. And you know, people will say, "Oh, what a terrible thing that those are Justin Bieber's the most important thing today." And the answer is, yes, that's true. That's a horrible sign. But the second thing is, I mean, it's not horrible, but you know, it's. I'm stepping on some toes. We can agree that it's superficial. But the other thing is, All I care is that it is. Older people are going to so often get on high horses and say that's good or bad. I don't really care. I care what is, because that's what people are buying into, and how do we meet them there without judging them and without saying, I'm going to reach out to you even though you are so superficial, and I want you to know that this is below me. So I think younger people, I think youth workers are more able to do that than anybody. So that's what I would encourage you. Just keep your finger to the wind constantly and figure out what's going on and be nimble. And you'll lose your ability to do that. By the time you get to be about 30, you have a house and you're spending weekends spreading mulch, then you need younger people to do that. I do want to commend you all for your great questions. Thanks for reading my book. You obviously took it seriously, and I really appreciate that. And Hank, thank you so much for having me.